All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting for December 8th in the US. And yeah, I want to start today's meeting off with a bit of good news here, and that is that we have a maintainer transition that is happening. One, I want to thank Shane for his tremendous work to lead this community for so long. He's been a maintainer of Gateway API for several years, and his history goes back to near the beginning of Gateway API. Um, but he's been pretty busy with a lot of additional work items over the past year or two, and so I'm really excited that he's chosen to nominate Ricardo as his successor. And yeah, Ricardo has already been doing some amazing work for Gateway API. So I would not be surprised if some of you had already assumed he was a maintainer, but this is making that a bit more of a formality. So welcome officially, Ricardo, and thanks for the tremendous work you've been doing. Um,
Yep,
and
I'd agree from me. Yeah, I really appreciate everything that Shane has done for the Gateway API community and for Gateway API as an API. Yeah, in particular, I think that Shane has done an awesome job with really helping us with a lot of our project management stuff and a lot of the sort of process things on top of all the great technical contributions he's made, which are also great. But I think. Both Rob and I have really appreciated a bunch of help with project management things and release introducing the idea of a release manager and a bunch of other awesome stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, it's been great. Cool. Well, welcome, Ricardo, officially, you know. And yeah, on that, I think Ricardo, you've got the next item in the list, so I will hand it off to you for a bit.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, folks. So this is a discussion that appeared after. So after KubeCon, we had this discussion about external infrastructure controllers, mostly external DNS and Cert Manager, and how they should be reconciling which information they should be using, right? So we have the separation of concerns on Gateway API between who is the cluster admin, the infrastructure admin, and the developer, right? And this week we had this discussion about how external DNS should be actually behaving, which was a valid discussion because some users when they were using Ingress API, which is much simpler than Gateway API, right? They would have TLS certificates, and the cert manager would already reconcile that, and they would have external DNS, and external DNS would also reconcile that. So that's a we took the decision during KubeCon to use Gateway and Listener Set when they were available because they are actually how we can say infrastructure resources-ish, right? So they actually configure a listener on the proxy. They change certificates. While uh, routes, they are more like some discriminator or where the traffic should be routed to, right? But I think it would be good for others if you have ideas or if you want to chime in on the thread or even discuss what we should be, how we should be moving next. I know that Nick is working on that as well, and he will be speaking about that. Because those feedbacks, they are actually great for us to understand if we missed some case. I still think, my personal opinion, that we should avoid allowing any user to configure DNS. So that it's problematic when you have resources like HTTP route being used to configure external DNS, and was a problem on Ingress resources as well. But I think that we can start thinking about like how to evolve those external infrastructure offers better. Which also brings me to another subject that we've been discussing. It's slightly related with this one, but I'm not going to bring that fully, which is, other infrastructure related things like service definition versus cloud controllers and other things. So all of those things, they should be part of this, in my opinion, this infrastructure definition and an external controllers discussion. Yeah, that's it.
So
Anyone have any question? Oh, go for it. Sorry.
I saw Candace added some things, some notes. Did you want to add anything, Candace?
I was trying to keep just some notes down, keep track of what the discussion was. I hope I got it right. So I said that the goal was separation of concerns between admin and developer. And another point that Ricardo made was listener versus route as the named object in DNS, I think. Did I catch that right?
I think that's a good summary. But
Yeah,
Okay.
Ricardo, what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah. External DNS today works with routes. We are proposing to them to move to listeners and gateway. But some users, they have concerns about that because they expect that the routes they are yet used to program the DNS.
Yeah, so I think that, and one of the reasons I've taken on writing a document about this is to try and sort of have a single place where we can have recorded some of the reasons why we've designed things the way we have, and why why only using the route is not a good idea. The more I've thought about it, Ricardo, I think that it may be that we will need to end up having HTTP routes be able to do some DNS changes, but I think what's important is to make sure that any DNS changes produced by HTTP routes are tightly scoped and sort of controlled by settings at the listener level. So the reason for all of this at the end of the day is that if you're not careful, it's very easy for HTTP routes to and end up creating conflicting domain names, and which means that you can, by accident or design, steal other people's traffic away from their service. So it can be a big security problem. You don't want people, accidentally or on purpose diverting your www traffic away from your main web server to some small microservice. Um, yeah, it's one of the things that we're worried about. But conversely, one of the biggest things that people like about Ingress is actually one of the things that hurts people the most, but they just never run across it, and that's how magic Ingress is. Ingress is magic because you can just put your host name on there, on your Ingress, and it all kind of just works. Except when it doesn't. But like so a lot for most people, for most of the time, it does just work. And that means that, you can point Cert Manager at it and it'll make your TLS certificates. And you can point external DNS and it'll handle the DNS. And you can point both of them at the same ingress object and it'll most of the time just work. As long as, and that's awesome for sort of simpler use cases where you don't have a multi-tenant cluster and there's no like concerns about the DNS management or certificate management or anything like that. Like, so for the happy path, it's very happy, very smooth, and very low friction. And so people are used to that. And when they come to Gateway API, they're like, why do I have to do all of this extra work? And the real answer is because of the ways that it can go wrong, and that it has gone wrong for many people. And they're like, but I've never seen that. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because you haven't run into this specific thing. But I guarantee you that when you do, it will be a bad day. And so what we need to do is to sort of educate people as to why we've done this the way we have, and take into account their feedback about ways that we can make this a bit less lower friction for them, while still making sure that we're addressing these concerns, and making sure that we take away as many foot guns as possible. It's not possible to take away all the foot guns, but we can make it so that you really have to work at it, right? Like, if you really want to point a gun at your own foot and then pull the trigger, then like you can, but like we need to make it so you've got to really want to. That's not something that happens by accident. So yeah, that's what that doc is about. As part of writing that doc, I realized that I needed to explain a bunch of things because I assumed that, I started sort of laying it out, assuming that folks were coming from Ingress and Nginx and know nothing about Gateway API. And in the process, I've realized I needed to explain a bunch of concepts that we actually don't explain very well at all on the website, on any of our docs either. So I think I'm going to start by writing a preamble that will sort of explain things like, you have to check the status first to find out what's going on, and what gateways, listeners, and routes actually do. the distinctiveness, concept of distinctiveness in lists of things, like how a listener is selected, how a route attaches, what routing discriminators are used, because you need to understand all of that to be able to understand why we've done things the way we have when we're saying like, hey, you have to have a host name set on the listener. And I think we had a great thread with an end user on Slack. Hang on, I want to call them out in particular. Jason, sorry, I probably won't get your name right, Bilio or something like that. Yeah, but I did want to call Jason out because like it was really great questions that he asked, and I'm really appreciative of him for asking that because that is exactly the sort of thing that we need to have people do. Is if you don't know, ask because more than likely other people have the same question you do. This is a big thing that's happening, and there's a lot of there's a lot of people have a lot of questions, and it's hard for me and other folks who have been doing this for a long time to know like what questions we should be answering. But when you see a few people ask the same questions, then it's like, oh, okay, everyone needs this explained. And so then it's much easier to write something about it. So yeah, and so Ricardo, to answer sort of the other thing that I was saying, I think my gut feeling at the moment is that for external DNS, I think it's going to need to be something like you've got to always look at the host name on the listener. There must be a host name on the listener. You've got to look at it, and then you can create like you must create like an A record from the listener or something like that. But then you can create C names based on the host name on the HTTP routes or something like that. Like sort of be a bit specific about how the DNS should work, so that A, it makes it easier for the external DNS folks, but B, that sort of creates a model for how the DNS should work so that we can help people make sure that that people can't use it incorrectly. But I haven't really finished thinking about that. But that's what the document is intended to cover.
And where is this document? Is it
It's in
linked
my
here
brain.
or? Oh,
It is in my brain. It is not written yet.
One thing to consider, it's just like on routes that don't have hostname discriminator, like
Mm.
TCP and UDP route, like how we would in those cases accept them as well,
Yeah,
right? So
so
that's
it's actually a good question. The very shortest version of the answer that I can give here is hostname is not meaningful on TCP route and UDP route. You can't look at a host name because you have to unwrap the TCP packet to do that. DNS is a higher level construct than TCP route or UDP route, so there is no point having a host name on there. You can putting a host name on a listener that's a TCP listener is useful for something like external DNS, but that's the only place that it will be useful. And there's no point putting a host name on a TCP route or UDP route because you can't use it as a routing discriminator for those protocols. Uh, okay, but I think I've probably talked enough about that. So does anyone else have anything that they want to say on this one?
No, that's great. Thank you, Nick. Um,
Next one's mine too. So,
yeah.
um,
So yeah, I was gonna say,
yeah.
yeah.
So this one, I just Ricardo and I think Stephen and I maybe were talking about this about listener set. So no, I think it was David. For listener set, we've added an attached listener's status field into Gateway. Now we already have an attached route status field in in each listener. That that is currently being used by implementations as a place where you count. It's a count of the number of routes that have successfully attached to that listener. Although that's not what the specified behavior actually is. So we've agreed that attached listeners will be the account of listeners that have successfully attached to the listener. But we need to do some spec updates just to clarify that language because it is very unclear at the moment. I reread it and I was like, what? Did we really said that this is just anything that references it, not anything that attaches successfully? Oops. So yeah, I mean, a good lesson in how hard it is to write spec language correctly. But yes, I just wanted to tell everybody, yes, that's what attached routes and attached listeners mean. Successfully accepted and attached. Uh, not just referenced, which is what the spec kind of says at the moment.
Yeah. Is that a
I will
PR that
work
you're
on that.
gonna?
Yep, I'll do that.
Um, cool. Okay. Steven, I've been seeing you've been doing a lot of stuff on Ingress to Gateway. We should
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, well, it seems like this is something people broadly care about, so I would
Yeah.
just give an update to let people know how it's going. I think today we just merged a doc, kind of scoping the project out. It seems like there are a lot of people around Reddit doing similar things, and I think it'd be kind of fun if I could get more community people involved, especially because this is like one of probably the lowest entry barrier of entry project, and Kubernetes are it's pretty far down there. But yeah, that's it. And once we get the more framework key stuff going, yep, that one. Then hopefully we can get lots of different community members involved.
This is awesome. Yeah, thank you for driving this all forward. What is, I know earlier there was, you had to remove a provider at some point. I think you've added everything back. Like
Yep.
maybe can you give, a quick summary for people who aren't paying as much
Yeah.
attention here
I think
of,
that diagram, the diagram on the description is actually really useful for giving a summary.
okay.
Yeah, but I'll give a quick context. So we have providers. A
The second
provider
one.
is kind of a module that historically has let you kind of read like any arbitrary resource and parse it in the resource kind of ingress specific way. Uh, for example, like Ingress Nginx had one, Nginx Ingress had one, whatnot, and then output also Gateway API and any corresponding resource, which didn't make a lot of sense because Ingress Nginx is not going to output any interesting Gateway API or something that isn't Gateway API, right? Um, and that's how most providers did it, where they would change the way you would read the ingress and related resources, but would just output normal Gateway API.
Mhm.
And that was really nice because now where you can have a different provider which reads it, but also an emitter that writes Gateway API and maybe some non-standard resources. It kind of just fit in because none of the existing providers were outputting anything interesting that wasn't Gateway API, with the exception of GC, which is why I removed it, and I was kind of hoping I could get away with it, but that's okay. I just added it back today in the framework of how we're doing things now. So now there's a
So,
GC provider that reads GC specific resources and a GC emitter that will output also GC specific resources.
Yep. I think one of the things I
okay.
like most about this is that sorry, Leo, just give me a sec. And is that I really appreciate you, Stephen, taking the time to lay out, make sure that we all had agreement on this sort of contract about these emitters, because part of the thing about the emitters is that you can have the emitters be submitted from sort of third-party code. So, any implementation can submit their own emitter that then can emit, that then is allowed to emit their own implementation specific stuff. And the fact that they are allowed to implement that implementation specific stuff in a Kubernetes repo is actually a pretty big deal. And so we needed to make sure that we had a very clear guidelines and policy around how that happens and like what happens if you don't keep up with your responsibilities about that third party code. So thanks for coordinating that, Stephen. I know that was probably a bit painful, but it is one of those things where we really need to make sure it is all 100% above board. Otherwise, we are going to get in trouble, rightfully so, from steering an architecture for sort of hosting third-party code that that we don't have security context for and a bunch of other stuff like that. We don't want to end up in the same situation that Ingress Nginx did at the end of the day. No shade to you, Ricardo. It was not your fault. Okay, yeah, Leo.
Yeah, yeah. Plus one to everything that Nick said, and thanks Stephen for that. I have a quick question. So like, isn't the goal that like eventually every like vendor would be able to support an input and an output? As an example, like Ingress Nginx is obviously the vast majority of the use cases, but I think one of the earlier iterations of the project was like, okay, we have like we probably want to, and I understand like it can probably gets complicated, but like as an example, let's say you have an implementation, I don't know, emissary, right? Tomorrow emissary comes and like, okay, I want to support like reading our stuff and having it to an IR, probably like obeying to the same interface that we're defining and all that. And then some other implementations could, like, for example, users could say like input emissary and then output envoy gateway as an example.
Yeah, that's still the goal. I think I saw your comment. I think I just did some bad naming. But the goal is that you have a middle layer that is implementation neutral, hopefully.
No, but okay, no, because like when you responded to GCE, you mentioned that the solution was to make GCE as a provider and as an emitter, which to me it feels that every provider should be able to implement a provider and an emitter. That's the, like, as long as you're a provider that is able to implement, converting my stuff to some intermediate and then converting from some intermediate to my stuff. I think that makes sense.
I think that's fine, subject to the things that we just worked out, though, right? Like,
sure.
it has to be built around Gateway API resources. And you are allowed to have some extensions that we all agree are in scope, right? Like, that's the key part here, is that it's not from anything to anything, right? Like, it's from anything to Gateway API plus some extra bits. Like,
I mean, like, as long as the intermediate representation is tracked within this repository, this means that you're already controlling what can be converted, like what's the from, right? And then the emitter parts is like the thing that Stephen worked to provide governance, which I think is agreed and makes sense to all of us right now. I'm just trying to make sure we're providing. So like the GCE example on this point, like you can read GCE and you could spit out GCE. So I think if it's not the case, like, it should be supported for any provider. That's my point, not just like Ingress Nginx stuff.
Yeah. So that's the whole point of having a neutral IR that is stored in this repo, is to have like a neutral point of conversion where you can have anything go into it and then Gateway API plus whatever come out. With the intent being that over time, the plus whatever gets smaller and smaller and less significant because Gateway API gets bigger. And like we can handle more and more things just with bare Gateway API. And so the emitters become less and less important over time. That's the sort of the overall goal here. Right, like when I was working on Contour, we had ingress route and HTTP proxy. Like the point here is to make it so that you could go from ingress route or HTTP proxy to Gateway API, right? Like, you could, or if those things handled stuff that native Gateway API doesn't, then you can use Envoy Gateway, or you can use someone else's extra implementation specific emitter to get the functionality that you really need today. With the intent being that the other thing that this is going to really help us with is that IR actually then becomes like a very great reference for when you're writing a GEP, because if you can write manage to get the IR to represent stuff in a way that's useful to everybody, then you've done a large part of the design work that we need to do for a GEP already. In that you've found the commonalities and you've made it work across multiple data planes as well, which is one of the hardest parts about doing a GEP. Sorry, Rob, I'll shut up now.
No worries. The one thing I kind of wanted to ask is a little off the beaten path, but Stephen, I think that Ingress to Gateway right now exclusively reads ingress classes and ingresses. Is that correct?
No. For example, I'm pretty sure the Istio thing will read virtual service.
Oh, right. Okay. So you can read any. Okay. Because where I was going with that is like for backend TLS, we would need to read a secret and write a config map, for example, like because Ingress Nginx has config and a secret, but it's also going to be scary for users of this project to just say, yeah, you can read all my secrets. But I guess they're used to that with Ingress controllers, so maybe not a big deal. But like, just trying to think of like how I guess if this is primarily run as a CLI tool, we just inherit the permissions of the person running it, and that's okay. we haven't had to package any RBAC with it. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to like
Food for thought.
think that through because if we ever do go further with this, I know at KubeCon some folks had mentioned like maybe at some point this runs as a controller. I'm not sure I'm sold on that, but if it did, we need to think more about guardrails for what it can and cannot read because RBAC would yeah, I'll just finish reference grant. But yeah. Okay. That seems reasonable then. Stephen, I know you've got a lot on the plate for Ingress to Gateway. Is there anything you're currently blocked on?
I mean reviews, but
Yeah. Well, right. But
otherwise,
it's
no.
it's reviews on this one, and then and then after this, what comes?
I think there are people on my team that are looking to make contributions, like just feature
Right.
stuff or integration
Yeah.
tests. There's been like one person in the community who seemed pretty interested in contributing. So yeah, so just getting people to contribute, making some noise. It seems like people ironically after Ingress and GenX, there has been a lot of seems like there people want to contribute all
Yeah,
this
I've
stuff.
seen
So I think this would be great
Understandably.
at place.
I've definitely seen at least three conversion tools already posted on subreddit and other places.
Yeah. Do we so this is all very exciting. Do we want when we have documentation for this? I know we basically just have a README that is relatively long right now, but as the project expands in scope, I can imagine we're going to want to have more detailed documentation.
Yeah.
Is there a preference on if that documentation lives on Gateway API docs or on like a separate doc site for Ingress to Gateway?
Gateway API docs seems like a fine place to me to avoid kind of splitting it off into its own thing and dealing with all the infrastructure for that.
Makes it seem more official too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Supportive of that too. So like maybe we
I think there's also some additive stuff. Oh, sorry.
The trickiest part is just going to be mechanically making it work so that we don't need to manually keep the Ingress to Gateway parts of the Gateway API docs in sync with the Ingress to Gateway. So we might have to, figure out a way to have the Gateway API docs build, pull the Ingress to Gateway docs somehow, or like where do we keep the docs? And that's the trickiest part.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But we're going to have to solve that problem regardless of whether or not we put it all on the same website or have two different websites. So yeah. But that's definitely going to be a thing that will need to happen pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, and there's some additive stuff too for like traffic shifting and like how do you actually like do a blue green of like do this, spin up your new thing, then reroute traffic over it. So
I believe Rob has an item about this later in the agenda.
Okay. Cool. Excellent.
Because I've been thinking about it.
This is a great transition.
Yeah, let's pull Rob's item next. Hang on.
All right, that's very kind. So like one of the things I've been very aware of, and
you want to pop your PR open, Rob?
Yeah. So the first thing, I'll fully admit to doing some vibe docking here. I don't know, like vibe coding for docs. I don't know what the equivalent is, but this is basically just unique to HTTP route to start. But all the features that have conformance tests that didn't have docs. And so that included CORS, method matching, query param matching, some tweaks to request mirroring, and timeouts, which is a fair, some significant pieces where you could, understand how someone looking at Gateway API for basic capabilities would say, oh, well, they don't have CORS, they don't have that, they don't have all these things, so I should look elsewhere, right? So that is kind of the P0 low-hanging fruit for me is just like, let's clear out all these gaps in our documentation. What I would love to see happen next is a kind of like right now, if you look at our doc site, we have a getting started guide, which is good. Thank you to the folks that wrote it. There's, it's a good start, but there's a lot that I think can overwhelm people. Like we've seen some issues come in of like installing Gateway API is confusing. I haven't had to deal with this before. Like, like providing some more guardrails, assistance, content here could be helpful. Ricardo has some good content coming along for like how you might want to, what criteria you might want to consider when installing a gateway controller. So trying to like, maybe instead of a getting started page, we have a section that is about like people that are new to Gateway API. And maybe within that section, we have something specific for people that are coming from Ingress Nginx in particular, because one of the things that I think will be particularly interesting to Ingress Nginx users would be features like timeouts that have like an unclear mapping, because like I was using these three, timeout annotations on Ingress Nginx, and there's one timeout value on Gateway API. Like, which one? What is that? Like how do I make sense of this? Those are kinds of the things which benefit from more than just a translation, but also an explanation of like things don't line up precisely, but here's how you can make the most of it. And then a big shout out to Nick for the recent update to the implementations page, which already calls out kind of the conformant and partially conformant implementations, which is a good kind of first step. I think this page used to be a lot more overwhelming when there was just a list of like 40 to choose from. And now there's a list of, less.
I am going to go through and I'm going to remove the sort of the GA callouts behind all of the things on the next time I touch this page, because I don't think they're adding anything now. Everybody's GA now.
Well,
I'm going to remove all of the GA ones and say implementations are GA unless they say otherwise.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I buy that one. Okay. Cool. So that's like my overarching hope for the docs in the next, handful of weeks. I really do think there's going to be a lot of people looking at our documentation. I want to make sure it's as welcoming as it possibly could be. And right now, I think there's unfortunately a fair number of gaps or confusing parts to it. So, yeah. And if anyone wants to look at that PR and drop an LGTM, it looks like I need to rebase it. But so actually an LGTM will be wasted. But I will rebase it this afternoon. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Nick, you're up. You're up next.
Which one was this? Oh yeah, so I just wanted to say, yes, I'm working on the new docs. I think I mentioned this before. I think I'm going to write it out as one doc and then show everybody, and then we can figure out how best to split it up. But yeah, as I said, in order to be able to educate people about host names, you actually need to know a lot about how Gateway API works to understand how route attachment, hostname intersection, SNI matching and host header matching works. So I thought, well, maybe I should write that down. And then as I started writing down those headings, I was like, oh, this is probably actually really useful for everybody who wants to use Gateway API. So yeah, the idea here is to sort of break down, like, here's some important things you need to know, like where can you configure host names and what does that do? And then here's the standards for programmatic use of a hostname field. And because I think that's the key part here about, we're talking about the hostname field, and like when and where it's okay to do that, to use that in a sort of programmatic way, as opposed to the ways that it's currently defined when you're using a Gateway API implementation, sort of an external controller way that's not a Gateway API implementation. The language that I can't remember the language that I used on the implementations page, but there's another term that we use on there. back on the implementations page. Hang on, sorry. It is integrations. That's right. Yeah. So for Gateway API integrations as opposed to implementations, that's what this is going to be. This is going to be rules for Gateway API integrators who are writing controllers that use Gateway API not for actually routing traffic. That's a Gateway API implementation. But for driving other changes, that's a Gateway API integration. Naming is important. So that's just wanted to signal to everybody that's what I'm working on. I will try and have some stuff about that this week.
Cool. All right, I added one more thing here that I don't know if Keith is still on the call, but we've been having a conversation over in the AI Gateway Working Group that feels relevant. I think, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this proposal is eventually heading to Gateway API. So just to try and, get ahead of it, could be useful to talk about some things that may be interesting to Gateway API community. Well, Keith, you're better at explaining the high level idea of this gap, and I don't know if it's been talked about at Gateway API meeting yet. So maybe you want to give like a 2-minute intro to what you're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Honestly, did not even think about presenting it here, but seems obvious now. So appreciate you putting it on the agenda. So the idea behind this proposal is to try to assist a lot of the folks in the AI space with solving egress. And egress is a thing that Gateway API has talked about doing lightly. There have been PRs and provisional gaps, I think, in the past by some folks, but it never really took off. And we're seeing with AI a lot of calling of services that live outside the cluster, a lot of these egress concerns. And so this proposal is an attempt to try to codify how that can happen. Not just for AI, I want to be clear about that. So not just for AI, but also more generally. And so the idea for this really goes back to a conversation that we had in Gateway API about 3 years ago, 3 years ago, which is around the different roles of service. How service serves two functions, a front end and a back end. The front end being a VIP that things can call. Maybe more some details, but generally a service is a thing that things can call, and so we will use that front end role to sort of be the target for a certain policy that takes place around the routing decision before load balancing. It's what clients will try to talk to. It's how you do some matching on traffic at the proxy level. That's the front end part, the front end role. And then the backend role is really what we often call the bag of endpoints role that service plays, where it's really doing load balancing across a bunch of hosts or endpoint in Kubernetes parlance. So this resource is really meant to encompass the backend part of what service does, but also expand it to cover backends that live outside of the cluster. And so what you'll see in the proposal is sort of this type, and one of those types is one of the main type that we're really looking at is FQDN. So, appreciate it, Rob. So in this example, you'll see that the destination type is FQDN, and then that FQDN has a host name, and then the backend has a set of ports that you are going to be talking to. So in this case, it's api.openai.com. And you can talk to on different ports. And one of the decisions that I've gotten this initial proposal is to sort of inline the TLS per port here. That's sort of the 2-minute overview. I know that Rob and I have had some conversations around the inlining of TLS specifically. That is probably really interesting to this group here. But I'm happy to take this in any direction.
Yeah, sorry to throw you, with no prior notice on this one, but this started with the TLS discussion. I thought it would be relevant here, and I thought, well, people may not have context, but so TLS specifically, has been an interesting discussion point of we have a completely new backend type. This backend type is likely to be useful for a wide set of things, including, basically this egress use case for AI gateway, egress in the generic sense outside of AI anything, and then this agentic stuff too, right? So like there are a lot of different stakeholder projects or work streams or whatever that would benefit from something like this. And what I think feels particularly unique about this proposal is, and John kind of called it out as well, is that we're inlining TLS configuration instead of using backend TLS policy. This, I think, my comment was basically, if we choose anything other than backend TLS policy, we need to have a good justification for it. And I think you had some good points here, but because this feels like it is coming for Gateway API eventually, I figured, getting like an early read on what others think here about, like, maybe the higher level question to me is, we have a lot of policies today that extend service because we didn't feel comfortable adding those features directly to service because they probably wouldn't be accepted, right? I mean, that's the reality. And if they did, it would take years. Given this state, like, if we have a backend type where we can put anything in, should we inline everything? I think that's kind of like the, if we can, should we? It feels like the question. I don't have a really good answer to that, but I wanted to get some other folks thinking about it and some other feedback while we have folks on the call.
And if I can, Rob, I'm so glad you brought up that point, because that has been my understanding as far as why backend TLS policy is a policy attachment. And I just wasn't sure, or I wasn't around as much, so I didn't want to claim that. But part of the reason why I did this, I have some opinions, obviously, which is why I sort of started with inlining. But I feel like if we have a new resource, I want to at least ask the question of whether or not we should inline and spend some good time on it. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think we do have this opportunity to think about sort of, if we're starting from scratch, where would these things live. Not to say that this API is perfect, or it's just a sort of really the first draft of it. But yeah, looking forward to discussing.
John, were you first? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yes, he was first.
Yes, I win. Yeah, I'll just give some feedback. I don't have I haven't come up with my own final opinion, so I'll just give some info to input for others on the side of not doing this, because I think we've heard from the side of doing this. So a few things, like one, we talked about, okay, we did attachment because we don't own the resource, but the policies that we'll want on backend are also policies that we'll want on other things as well, like service or other resources, which will likely mean that we end up making them a policy as well. Additionally, this is going to be the core set of configurations, but vendors are going to have extensions, right? So users are also going to have inline things and policy attached things. This is kind of the same state we have with filters in policy, which I don't love, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So it's not like it's fundamentally wrong or anything. Like, I think it's fine. It's just we end up with kind of a potential weird state where to do the same thing, you're doing it a lot of different ways, depending on if it's backend or service or third-party extension or first party, and then there's a whole matrix of where you put a config on a backend. Again, I'm not even convinced that that's a reason not to do it. I'm on the fence, so I'm not sure.
No, plus one, and for inference, for example, the default guidance there is backend, poorly documented guidance is backend TLS policy, right? Because that's how you do backend TLS. This is the first time, in both those cases, we're talking about endpoints within Kubernetes, not really this external endpoint case, which does feel a bit distinct or potentially distinct. So yeah, Nick.
Yeah. So two things. I think it might be worth, unless we want this to be also able to be used for cluster internal backends, then it might be worth putting egress in the title or making it clear that it's an external backend, and it's for that specific use case. Yeah, that makes it a little bit more like, kind of a egress gateway or something like that. But that's just a small thing. But so yeah, for the TLS thing, yeah, my first impulse is to be like, yeah, I like inlining. I've been implementing backend TLS policy, and like I will defend the decision to make that a service attached policy, because like, I said we should do it, and I agree, and I think it's the best place to do it. But like, it sucks in many ways. In order to know if a policy is relevant, you need to know that the service is used in a HTTP route that's used in a gateway that's used in a gateway class that you compare it about. Right, it's like 4 layers deep of like tracking of references, and that kind of sucks. The inlining has the advantage that you don't need to track as many references. And which sucks, and it sucks for users and for implementers, because for implementers it means you have to track those references to be able to figure out if you should allow the reference or not. And then for users, it means you have to sort of keep track of where everything is used. And we haven't figured out the right way to handle the status for that. Whereas for backend, it means that we can be more explicit about some of the sort of the day 2 problems of like what happens if you make a typo, what happens, how does the conflict resolution work, and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, like I'm slightly on the side of inlining for that reason, because of the sort of the discoverability problem of using policy in general. That like I agree with you though, John. Like I'm not 100% either way. I think it's probably good to try this. This is actually a great place to try this out and see what the how it works. Because AI wants to move so fast. Like I'm like, well, yeah, great. Like let's use the fact that y'all are gonna do this and then implement it immediately, because AI has to have all this stuff done yesterday. And so that means we're going to get really fast feedback on how well this design works and what the sharp edges are. So those things kind of incline me to say let's do it, but that's not a hard yes. So yeah, again, I haven't had a proper think about this either. Mike.
Cool. So I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction and go emphasize more of the part that Rob was talking about. However, I think that this API, like in potential like best case, is not just limited egress. I think it's something that could have like at least like 4 different use cases potentially, including like actually becoming a different or better replacement backend for service. There's multi-cluster use cases for like bridging to endpoints potentially that live on other clusters. There's like mesh expansion use cases for like bridging to VMs or for like onboarding VMs into a cluster. There's failover cases, which is something that we don't have in HTTP root currently. We only have like split load balancing. And then there's also the like egress FQDN case. So with all of that in mind, I really want us to kind of approach this from this like wider perspective, and also make sure that we're not taking some shortcuts with the UX that end up conflating the front end and back end role. So I think like if we stick this resource, like this backend resource, like purely in a backend role, there's a lot that we can do with it. And that was the spirit of some of my initial comments on it, was around making sure that we're not like first classing the FQDN front end ish things for like the intercepting traffic to that FQDN. And then with that, there's also like namespace scope versus cluster scope use cases that may be different, and potential also consideration for like defaults versus overrides in those use cases too. So I love that the effort put into a first draft here. I think that there just might be a bit more work to make sure that we're designing something that's going to be appropriate for all those use cases.
Yep. And sorry, the last thing I wanted to say was I think the best thing about this particular proposal is that because it's for the specific AI use case, it's actually okay if this specific use case is focused in on doing AI stuff, because we don't have to lift and shift this exact thing into the core API. Like, it's okay for people to do stuff that's like doesn't end up being exactly the same as the core API stuff. It's nice for that to be as close as possible, but it's also useful to sort of know what things are, like keep track of what things are, specifically AI things. And because I think if you try and make this too general, it's going to take you too long. Like, it's not going to be viable in the time frame that you need. Keith.
I was going to actually make that exact same point. So I completely agree with what Mike said about not conflating front end and back end. And that was, we discussed a lot of this in the working group AI Gateway meeting last week. That was one of the things we wanted to make sure we were clear about, that this should be sort of back end role only resource. But one of the things that scares me about that is that are so many ways and directions that we can go with this. And from an execution perspective, that's horrifying, because it will take us 2 years to get it right.
Yes, sir.
And so I think sort of my principles in trying to design the API is to try to sort of leave space for growing the use cases down the line. Like this, where you see the type of Kubernetes service, the type of maybe IP address, but just sort of leave some of them underspecified and focus on doing FQDN right. And then, once we know what works, what doesn't for that, we can start adding in additional use cases. I think one of the reasons why I'm happy that we have backend TLS policy is so that we don't have to design for the service use case immediately. I can just sort of think about, okay, what makes the best sense for external FQDN? And one of the things that I've got in this proposal is I think we should do TLS by default and make users explicitly opt out of TLS when talking to an external thing. And so you see that reflected in the API. And then later we can figure out how to marry that with uh, service if we decide to keep that. So that's sort of just a philosophy of experimentation, and see, okay, let's just sort of start with this at first principles and see what we can do. And we'll figure out down the line. One thing I wanted to ask John, I don't think I completely grokked your point about policy. And we're going to have policies that target back and rev. Can you expound upon that, from my understanding, to make sure I'm following you?
So if I have a backend resource, I, as a vendor, am going to want to apply my own policies to it, right? So I'm going to have policies that attach to it. So now as a user, when I go and want to customize how I connect to my backend, I have to figure out, is this going to be a policy attached thing, or is it going to be an inline thing? And there's like two different places to do the same thing. Just like today with HTTP route filters, if I want to do external authorization, it's a filter, but if I want to do, I don't know, used to authorization, it's a policy attachment, right?
Yep.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. But if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that this is not necessarily a unique. We're perpetuating the problem. It's not a new problem, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the way I do want to leave a couple minutes for Ricardo. So, but the way I view it is we could have kind of the like least, a mediocre solution that works, consistently across everything, which is policy attachment, or we can have a confusing solution, but it, is optimized for the best case in every individual case. I'm not sure what the best is here. That's probably a bad summary, but I think just my takeaway is, if you're interested, before this gets to Gateway API, take a look. I think there's a lot of interesting topics in here that are going to affect Gateway API as a whole. So yeah, thanks Keith for owning that and running with it. Ricardo,
I have one more last thing I just want to say there. I think that the larger thing, very quickly, Rob, I'm very aware. The larger thing I think we need to remember, though, is that one of the reasons why we put things into, say, a filter for external auth is so that we can eventually make it clearer to people, like, why you would choose one over the other, right? Like, it shouldn't just be everything you attach, every way you extend the Gateway API as a policy, because that's what implementers have to do for their own specific ones. It should be the reason why it's a filter is X, and the reason why it's a policy is X, so that we in the upstream API, we need to be able to be very clear about those reasons why we're picking the things, so that then we can explain to people, this is why you end up picking this one thing. I do agree with you, John, that having multiple ways to do things can kind of suck, but if we're going to have multiple ways, they should be chosen for specific reasons that we can clearly articulate to people. That's where I'd like to see us get. Okay, over to you, Ricardo.
Okay, I could skip that one, but just quickly, I've been discussing internally and with some folks about reviving GAP 1651. It's also related with the how we allow admins to define infrastructure. That's a problem that we've been seeing happening more and more, which is users, they want to deploy a gateway and they want to use internal load balancer or external load balancer or a service of cluster IP. I know that each implementation, they do their own way. So I know that Istio allows doing, putting the service definition inside parameter reference. Cilium has its own configuration CRD, which kind of sometimes sucks for users that are considering Gateway API a way to, be as much agnostic as possible. So I want to go from one implementation to the other. I want to, move from Cilium to Istio, vice versa. And given that we are trying to make things as much generic as possible, I will probably be reviving this one with Dave, at least to see how many implementations are actually willing to have a more general way of defining infrastructure parameters that would apply to, to at least 3 implementations. I know that it wouldn't cover cases like GKE or AWS or cloud providers. Some things, they don't matter for those implementations, but usually on premises, we are seeing a lot of those cases where people, they're moving from one to the other, or even moving from Ingress to Gateway, and they have no idea how they should be implementing that on their own, on the implementation that they choose. I know that some things are implementation specific, but I will try to revive this one and try to define a small API-ish or whatever thing we want to add to the gateway definition to say like, okay, this is how you define public load balancer, internal load balancer, amount of replicas. I don't know. That's it.
Cool. Awesome. And a reminder for folks that are interested in pushing something forward in this next release coming in February, there is no formal scoping phase. If you want to get something in, just go for it, like Ricardo is. If you meet the criteria, you're in. That's it, right?
How the release works now. Yep.
Yeah. So just sooner the better to get something in. February comes quickly. So yeah.
Yep.
Don't forget
and
that.
Remember, there's a big break where there won't be anyone available to review your stuff.
Yeah.
So
yep.
get your stuff in sooner rather than later. Start talking about it now.
100%.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I added a quick thing at the bottom. I'm going to add tabs to this doc because it's currently struggling to load because we've got 5-6 years of history. And now we have document tabs available. I'll go through and add year tabs and move the older years out into separate things.
We had a similar discussion on SIG Network. I think there's like a new proper way to do documents for meeting agendas in Kubernetes now. We may want to just do a net new doc for this, similar to SIGNet. Bowie was trying to track that down. Let me start a thread on Slack or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
but yes,
start a thread on Slack and we can try. But we need to fix it. Like, I don't know about anyone else, but like my browser is being like, "Hey, I ran out of memory. I had to reload this tab."
Yes, sounds good. Awesome. Have a good rest of your week.
See you all later.
Thank you.